I think we're live now.
Are we live?
Yeah.
I think so.
Welcome to the QuaranCon2020 editing panel. Just a couple of things. Make sure you visit Artist Alley. I'll go ahead and post a link in the comments to that. We have a fair number of artists and writers and whatnot who've been affected by all the cons being canceled. So we wanted to put something together and to give them an opportunity to be able to show off their stuff. So today's this editing panel is about everyone needs an editor, and it doesn't matter if it's your first book or your 20th. So what do editors do, and what kind of levels of editing are there, and some tips and tricks. So I'd like to welcome our panelists. We've got Amanda Justice and Angela Board and Jess Lawrence and Monique Desir, and Monique is currently having some technical difficulties, so we'll get her on here as soon as she's able to join us. I'm the moderator for this. I'm Sonia Black. So to start off, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. Let's start with Amanda.
Oh, hi. I'm Amanda Justice. I am a science fiction and fantasy author. My first novel is called A Wizard's Forge. And I also have about, 30 years of editing experience. I started in the industry in academic publishing right out of college. My first jobs were editorial jobs, and about maybe 20 years ago, I shifted over to writing, primarily as for my day job, as well as my sideline, which is fiction writing. So there you
go. Awesome. Welcome, and let's take it over to Angela.
Hey, I'm Angela Board, and I am an indie fantasy writer. I'm not an editor. So I'm a finalist in this year's SPFPO, the self-published blog off fantasy, with my book is Fortune's Fool, which actually did require a lot of editing because it's very large, as you can see. But anyway, I've used different kinds of editing, so I guess I have a writer's perspective here for this panel, and that's, I guess, otherwise I homeschool my kids and I edit their papers, and they don't always appreciate that, but you know.
Well, welcome to you as well. How about Jess? How about you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jess Lawrence. I'm a freelance fiction copy editor, and I work mostly with independent authors. I've dabbled in a lot of genres. I've done like YA and middle grade fantasy up to adult thrillers, romantic comedies, and I do some writing myself as well.
Awesome. And I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I don't think we have Monique yet. I am Sonia Black.
I'm just a disembodied voice.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to try to sign in another computer, and then what I'll do is I'll sign into another computer that it's older, but it works. And then if you want to try that way, you can, but I'm just working on that while you guys talk. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No problem. How about you go ahead and introduce yourself quickly, and then we'll go on from there.
Thank you, Sonia. My name is Monique Altair. I write middle grade, young adult. I write poetry. I write books for adults. I really love dark fantasy, paranormal, and speculative fiction. I've been teaching for almost 20 years. I'm currently teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade remedial reading. I have 3 sons, 19, 7, and 4. Just been really busy living, and I'm writing. I recently was honored to be the judge of Colors and Healing's 3rd contest, and I was honored because I had won a few years ago, and then to be asked to judge, and to look at the editing and look at the beauty, the truth, and to say what was the best was really cool. So love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. My name is Sonia Black. I am also an independent author. I have published 4 books. I've been doing critiques and development mental editing for about 7 years or so, and work on various books and betas with various authors. So that's me in a nutshell. So why don't we go ahead
And you're
and
also a
jump in.
finalist. Don't forget to mention that.
Yes,
You're
I
al-
am an SPFBO finalist. Yes. So let's go ahead and get started here. My first question for you all is, what are the different types of editing and how do you know what type you need? So maybe we can pop that over to Jess since she's a copy editor, maybe she can help us differentiate between the different levels of editing and how you know what you need.
Okay, so I would say from a broad point of view, there are three sort of main categories, and it starts with your really big picture editing, which I think would include sort of your manuscript critiques and your developmental editing, and that's where you're looking at the story as a unit and the pacing and the characters, looking for any plot holes. There's the real big stuff, the chunky elements of it. Then I think you go down to the next level and you've got your line and your copy editing, which is more of the line by line, making sure the rhythm and the flow works really well. You're still looking for those bigger issues that might have slipped through the net, but you're really looking to get the core parts right and make sure the rhythm's really good and the dialogue flows well and naturally. And then I think at the final end, then you have your proofreading, which is the real fine tuning, very last stage in like the actual publishing process. It's the very final stage of your proofs. You do it on the proof copies. And at that point, you really ought to just be finding sort of, you know, like a missed apostrophe that you've missed in a couple of rounds, little spelling errors, things like that. It's your very small rounds of edits. So those are sort of the three main areas, I would say, in terms of the breakdown. In terms of which type you need, it's sort of a broad question, I suppose, but I think it depends where you feel like you are with your story. So I think if you've written this really good first draft, but you're sure that there's not something quite not working with it, you might want to go for a manuscript critique or a developmental edit just to work with somebody and really make the core of the story work and make sure that the elements are all coming together in the right way. If you think that you've actually done all of that and that the foundations are already good, you might just want somebody to come through with an eagle eye just to make sure that you've put all your apostrophes in the right place and all the sentences flow right. If you think you've done all of that and it's perfect and you're ready to say self-publish or something, you might want to just do a final proofread just to get something through and make sure that you've checked all those final errors. So it's a sort of a judgment call of what you think you might need at that point and what level you think you can do some of the parts yourself, which can be quite tricky to work out.
Right.
Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
I wanted to say I think you have to be really critical of yourself as an author to really make that judgment objectively, because a lot of authors, and I think this does have to do with how experienced they are, but a lot of authors think, especially first-time authors think, first draft, it's perfect, it's ready to go, yay! And they're like ready to go to just, the final cold read, proofreading, just make sure that all of the I's are dotted and T's are crossed stage without having really a sense of whether or not their story actually works. And if you have beta readers have kind of taken the place of developmental editors, way back when, before there was such a thing as beta software testing. You just gave your friends and family your book and they were basically your beta readers. But I think it's important to emphasize the importance of a good beta reader, because a good beta reader isn't to tell you how great your manuscript is. A good beta reader and a good developmental editor will do the same thing. Is they'll tell you what is wrong with your manuscript, because that's what you really want to know when you first finish the book. And I think that, and as authors, we frequently don't have a good sense of that. We can't see the forest through the trees, and we don't really know what is wrong until we give it to somebody. So it's important that you have in your life that somebody that really can pass a critical eye and give you good information back on what could be improved in the manuscript. And sometimes if you don't have that person in your life that's willing to give you that kind of a critique, or able to give you that kind of a critique, because that's another important part, is that it's not only just willingness, but it's actually the ability to give you feedback that's useful. Sometimes you have to go and get your manuscript and hire somebody to do that for you. So I would be, this is a really, really long way of saying that I think everybody should go and have that done. If you've got somebody that will do it for you because they love you and they can do a good job, that's ideal. But otherwise, I think everybody really should hire a developmental editor. So that's my view for
That
the
kind of
first round.
ties into the next question I have of how do you know when you're ready to submit to an editor? As a developmental editor, I get a lot of really messy manuscripts. There's a lot of grammar and spelling errors and stuff like that. So I kind of have to weed through that to get to the actual story. And I absolutely love it when I get a manuscript where they've at least done the basic spell check and grammar check ahead of time, so that I can actually focus on the big picture and
Yeah.
actually see where the issues are. But developmental editing is also not just telling you where things are wrong, but where things go right. There are parts of the story that just blow me away, and I'm like, hey, you really need to do more of this in the story. So it's both way, it's both things. And but so throwing this back out to you, especially our writers in the group, how do you know when you're ready to submit your manuscript to an editor?
Well,
any one of you can take it.
I guess I'll field it first, but and to go back to the other question too and tie it all together, I think it kind of like you would have it at different points to submit it to different kinds of editors. Like I'm a compulsive proofreader, so I would not send it to like a developmental editor without doing like a bunch of stuff, but like at least proofing it before I sent it in. But there's going to be like messier things, like structural things that aren't as good as I can make them because I needed the feedback, right? But on the other hand, because I'm kind of a hybrid pantser plotter, I need to do a lot of revision before I send it on to anybody. Like I have to finish a manuscript before I let a single person read it, like get to the end totally. And then I need to put it through like a whole revision and like, just kind of an edit. And at that point, I can't tell what's wrong with it or what's right with it, or I have like no perspective. And that's when I send it off to my beta readers. And I think when you're trying to figure out like what kind of an editor that you need as well, it comes down to resources. Like as an indie author, you only have so much money you can invest in your book. And in a perfect world, like we would probably hire everybody. You'd hire a developmental editor, you'd hire a copy editor, but it comes down to how much money you can put toward those things and how many friends you have that are willing to trade with you, or if you can find other people. And I've had a lot of good luck with the beta readers who I found who are just amazing beta readers. And so I feel a little bit more comfortable sending it out to them and going, look, tell me what I need to change, and then changing a bunch of it. Like with Fortune's Fool, I got it before I sent it into, I just had it copy edited. So before I did that, I got it almost as perfect as I can make it. And then I submitted it. With the sequel, it was a little bit rougher because I decided I needed a little bit more of a combination of developmental and copy edit. So I sent it in a little bit earlier, like it's not quite ready to be, it's a little bit earlier in the process.
I can say from somebody that does beta reading, I used to do developmental editing professionally, but I don't do that anymore. because it's just not in my, I don't have the professional hours in the day to allot to that. But I do beta reading for people. And just to your point, Sonia, I will say that when I get a manuscript that has a lot of grammatical errors and spelling errors and stuff, it is really hard to look past those. You get really bogged down with them in order, and you keep telling yourself, I'm just trying to read it for the big picture here, but then it can be a slog to get through those things. So I agree. It's tough I imagine it's tough for people because, frankly, there are really good writers out there who are terrible editors, who don't know the mechanics of the language. And it can be, and so for those people, maybe what they do need is to send it to a copy editor first. If they don't have that ability to do that themselves. But another thing is maybe for those people, utilizing the tools that are available, like the computer tools that are available, really is something that they should rely on more. I've personally never tried Grammarly or some of the other online editing tools, but maybe for that kind of individual, that as a first pass, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I know that I rely on Grammarly and ProWriting Aid for my own work before I ever send it out to anyone else, because it at least catches the basics and cleans it up enough that they can actually look at the big picture without getting, bogged down on those small errors. And it also helps if you use that kind of software, it starts to train you to see those mistakes so that you can, stop making them as often, right? So that your manuscripts are actually cleaner to start with. So, if you don't know where to start, that's a good place.
I have to say, I'm, even though I used to be a professional editor, I'm a terrible speller. And I totally rely on those little red squiggly lines to tell me when something's wrong.
So, since we haven't heard from Monique yet, maybe we can get her in here.
I'm here. I'm just trying to download it on my phone.
Yeah.
You gotta have grit.
Yes, as a writer, how do you even maybe begin to edit your own work? How do you get started on that?
I have a problem with putting things in passive voice sometimes. So I try to get rid of them and use active verbs as I'm writing. And then if some do leak through, then I'll just, be like, nope, we gotta get rid of that, scratch that. And then I'll look for like redundant words or like useless words or weak words. And then I have a problem and obsession with em dashes and commas. So I'll read it aloud to myself. I'm like, why are you stuttering like this? Why are you pretending you're, Kurt from Star Trek? And then I'll get rid of that. And then I'll give it to I love Amanda. She's amazing. She looked at some of my stuff before, God bless her. And then I gave it to like other writer friends, and they'll be like, this is good, or this sucks. Why are you doing this? I'm like, I'm gonna fix it. So doing it myself first, and then giving it to alpha readers, beta readers. I did consider paying someone to do it, and that can be really, really expensive. If you don't finesse your stuff first and polish it yourself first, you can spend a good paycheck. So doing the hard work first will, diminish the price.
Right. Anybody else have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I think in terms of like what you were saying before about at which point you should try and seek out an editor, I think Monique has just spoken to that in terms of how much work do you want the editor to do, knowing that the more work there is, the more it will cost, which I know is a bit of contention at that point, and there's a lot of discussion around whether it's too expensive and things like that. But the fact of the matter is that it is a lot of work, and we are the ones that go through and pick out all those commas, and we do just sometimes we stare at a sentence thinking, should I change that? Should I not change that? It's a lot of work. And I think for writers and authors, if you reach a point where you've hit a wall and you're like, I can't do this anymore myself, I really need a second pair of eyes, like that's the point where you have to reach out to somebody. And if you can do another draft, just be like, right, this time I'm just going to look for my overused words, I'm going to get rid of all the justs and the that's, and this time I'm going to look for this. If you can chip away at that, it will sort of reduce that price and there'll be less work to do. So if you can keep going and do that, it will help. And you will start to pick up on these things as well. So when you write your next story, you'll be like, oh no, I know I have a habit of using that, so I'm going to go in thinking that, and I won't have to edit them out so much. So
I will say, when I thought that I had gotten, I thought that when I sent my manuscript out to the copy editor, I was like, this is as good as I can make it. And then, it'll be no. And I got it back and I was like, I did not know I was that bad at using commas. I know nothing about commas. And I thought I did, and he sent me style sheets. I was like, I can't believe there are that many names in the book. And I had a character that I had changed the spelling of her name like 3 times, and I had read through this book and proofread it, before I sent. I was like, okay, I think it's good. It's not, no, it needed that, and plot holes too. Like, yeah, it saved me a lot of embarrassment.
I think I just want to, sorry, Sonia, but I just wanted to support what Jess was saying about I know that editorial help is expensive, and when you're an indie author, it's difficult to cobble together the resources to pay for that. But I cannot tell you how much it is worth it, and for authors to please invest as much as they can in editing, and don't tell your editor, oh, that sounds like too much. A quality editor, you get what you pay for. It really, Absolutely. Is true. And don't try to short shrift your editors on fees, because anybody that works for cheap is probably not going to give you a good product back. So
that kind of leads into, as we're talking about, how does a writer start even editing their own work? What types of software or tricks or tools do you use in editing your own work? For me, I use text-to-speech software often to, especially in the final passes before I publish, because it's really good at helping me pick out missing words and words that are spelled right but are the wrong word, or things like that. What kind of tools do you guys use for cleaning that up, those last steps, or to just get that final polish on your manuscripts?
Well, I use Pro Writing Aid. I didn't when I wrote Fortune's Fool, and I bought a license. Like, I think you can get a monthly subscription, or you can just buy a forever license, like you don't have to pay. It's like a one-time fee. And I just bought that because I don't use all the capabilities of it, but I like it enough because it kind of helps you tighten up the extra words that you use. And like I said, I apparently have a problem with commas that I didn't even know I had. So, I'll tell you, because I used to, but I've gotten a lot better. I mean, I used to they were kind of like ice cream sprinkles. I just sort of throw them in and they'd kind of land where they did. And my beta readers would say, I don't think you need that many commas there, Angela. But so I do that, and I do edit in hard copy when I'm doing it. So I will, when I get to the end, I will print out the entire manuscript, and I will do a read through of it first after I get the first draft done. And I will make a list in a notebook of all of the things that I see that I need to revise, that I want to revise. And then I'll just kind of go down my list. And the one that I'm working on now, it's so complicated that I actually did make a spreadsheet. I kind of broke down and used a spreadsheet, but and then I go through those, and then I'll print it out again and go through it again in hard copy. And I do make edits on the hard copy. And then as I'm typing them in, I usually change things again because I'll see more or whatever. So it's kind of a long process with me. I mean, especially since I write long books, it seems to take forever.
I think for me, a really important technique that I've only started employing recently is reading aloud, reading your own work aloud, because your eyes tend to see what your brain thinks is there. But, and I actually do this in my professional work too, is I write manuscripts for peer-reviewed medical journals. And before I submit, I will, I'll read the manuscript aloud, because it helps you, it forces your brain and your eyes to really slow down and really see what's actually there. You can pick up on on missing words, mistake words, spellings where sometimes you meant to write it's and it came out, is or something. Sometimes there's like those little sorts of weird typos. And it just helps you catch all those little things that you didn't even realize that you had done when mistakes that you'd made when you were making them. And so that has turned out to be a really, really valuable thing for me. When I had my book converted into audio, I had an Audible version of my book made. Proof listening to what the narrator read was revelatory, even more so than me reading it myself, because then I was like, there were some passages, of course it was, unfortunately the book was already published with them, but I was like, oh God, that's so awkward. And so in some cases I actually changed the wording, for even from the published book, because I just was like, I can't go on, it's gotta be, I gotta fix that, at least in the audio version. So, I think it's really, really valuable. Oh, it also helps. And a friend of mine does this. She will go through, and one of my beta readers does this, and she'll highlight. Sometimes you like have a favorite word or favorite phrase that you end up using without even really realizing that you keep using it over and over again. And she'll go through and she'll like highlight in the color blue every time I use like a word like, I like the word frigid. And so she'll go through and she'll highlight every time it appears in the manuscript. It's like, okay, yeah, okay, or if you use the word, stutter like 5 times in a paragraph, it's like, no, okay, you gotta get rid of that kind of repetition. So that's helpful too.
Yeah, I actually have a list for my own work of common words that I use way too much. And so one of my editing passes is to go through and highlight all of those. Luckily, Word has a highlighting option where you can type in the word and have it highlight. And so I go through and fix all those or take them out or rephrase, to get rid of them. But that's one of my editing passes, is to go through that list of words that I just seem to always use. It's one of my writing tics, and fix them ahead of time, so before I ever send it out to anyone else. So anybody else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the sort of tricks, I suppose you say, I use is to make sure I break my work up into chunks, because I really can't edit to my best ability for more than about 4 hours in a day if I really want to catch everything and be on like the top of my game. And I know when I edit my own work, I can get so absorbed in the story that I feel like I can edit for hours and hours and hours, but you will miss things. You will absolutely miss things, and you'll fall into your favorite passage, and you'll have missed the extra words and things like that. And so I would say sort of be strict with yourself. If you really want to make sure you're catching everything, do it in chunks. Make sure you step away from your computer for a bit and focus on something else for like 15 minutes, then come back to it, and just give your eyes a rest and your brain a rest, because it is a really intense activity to do proper involved copy editing. So you just have to pace yourself, because you'll miss things otherwise, and then you'll be kicking yourself later when you see these things and think, how did I miss them after 6 read-throughs of this story? So that's probably one of my big ones, I would say.
Yeah, I know that I do this, and I know other writers that do it, where you take it in passes. Like, on one editing pass, you look for the passive voice, and on another pass, you might look for all the extra adverbs you threw in because you were just trying to find a word, and so that kind of helps break things up a little bit, and helps you focus on that one thing that you're weak on. Anybody else have anything to add, or
Monique, do you have
you
anything?
still?
No, I
Monique?
think it'd be redundant. So I'm not going to, we're going to edit that. So no, I'm not going to anything else.
Well, then how about I throw this question out to you? When you, as a writer, when you submit to an editor, what types of things have you noticed changes when you get the work edited? What's lost? What's gained? What changes happen in the manuscript as when you get that editing back and you start working on your
more focused? When I started writing a long time ago, I was like a little kid, and I didn't take myself as seriously as I should have. So I kind of regret that now. And when I did start really seriously submitting work, and when I made my first big sale for short stories with Fire magazine, I was really proud of myself. I thought I was going insane, hallucinating. But I showed my mom and my husband the email. They're like, "No, you're not hallucinating. You're fine." So I saw it, and when I sent the story, the editor sent it back. He said that we want to make sure that we're focused on this just one of the characters. I had a mother and a daughter, and he said, "Who do you want to pick?" And I'm like, It was really the daughter's story, but I think it would have been better. She's the narrator, but the mother, what the mother tells her is so important. So I cut out the parts where it was the mother's point of view, and just kind of, I guess, revise and edit it into what the daughter's hearing her mother. Instead of it just being the mother telling us as the narrator, it's like a dialogue exchange between mother and daughter, and it made it more powerful. It was really, I was really impressed. I was like, "Yeah, this makes much more sense." So I feel like what he was able to do with it was to draw out and sculpt what I was already doing well, and to make it more magnified. That's what I love about editing. And then now that I've become more confident with what I'm doing, and what I want to do, I agree with what Jess said, what pretty much what everybody said about you take your work in chunks, because it can be so exhausting. When you're looking at this wealth, whether it's even a 5,000 story, it can be overwhelming if you look at it as a whole. And you can spend 3 hours easily editing, whereas we, burn through writing for an hour and get 2,000 words out. But you could spend 3 hours working just on a page. Was it Oscar Wilde? He said, I spent an afternoon taking a comma out and putting it back in, something like that. And it's the truth. That's what editing's like. It's and when you hear a trend with your writer friends or your beta readers, and they're all saying, "Wow, yeah, I like that scene, and I really like how focused it was. The setting was there. I could clearly see it. Keep that." Or they're like, "Oh God, that character, he was so contrary to what you built him to be. You needed, what were you doing? You need to fix that." So if you hear this common trend through everybody, your whole team saying the same thing, then it's a pretty good sign that you're all on the right track of making the story better.
Anyone have anything else to add, or?
Just to reiterate what everybody is saying, I agree that taking the work in chunks is really important. I agree that the danger of doing your own work, or the difficulty of editing your own work, is that you sink into the story and you get caught up with whatever emotions or excitement or whatever you were feeling as you wrote it can kind of sweep you away, and you think, this is terrific and it's perfect and there's nothing wrong with it at all. And the only tips I have, besides hiring another pair of I cannot emphasize enough the importance and the value of having another person look at your work. to
Mhm.
whether, you know, again, it's a professional editor, which is ideal, or, you know, or a really good critique partner. But it is important to get that, because we have in our heads our vision, and we think that we've achieved it. And frequently we haven't done so as well. But, and I've sort of lost track of what point I was going to make, but bottom line is that you should, you know, I completely agree, reading it in chunks. Some techniques I've heard other writers say is that they read their work backwards, sentence by sentence, and it helps them focus on the tightness of their prose, because you don't get caught up in the in sort of the flow of the story and the character arcs, but you're just looking at sentence by sentence by sentence, the actual words on the page. And it can help you get rid of things like unnecessary prepositional phrases that we all throw in, like she put the knife down on the table. And it's like, we don't need like all of those words to convey that image. So, you know, you think about like how you can trim that down to its immediate essence, to sort of like help your pacing of your prose and help move your reader along through the story without giving them a lot of unnecessary detail. So those types of techniques can sometimes help. I'm afraid I don't do the backwards reading thing myself. Sometimes I feel like I should, because when I do like really zero in and go sentence by sentence and really slow down, I can find a lot of those unnecessary prepositional phrases, but I all too frequently leave them in my own work. So that's probably my true confessions of a writer. That's probably my greatest weakness. The thing that I wish that I could expunge is the unnecessary prepositional phrase. So.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Any,
oh, go ahead. I have to.
no, go ahead.
I've got a kid standing here trying to ask me questions at the same time.
I need my charger.
Just go upstairs, okay?
He's so cute.
I am at 7%.
But I would just say that a lot of the time too, like especially for like beta readers, I get it to a point, and I know there's something wrong with like a scene or a chapter or, you know, a story thread or something, but I don't know what it is. You know, it's like something sits wrong with me, and I get it to a certain point, and then I cannot fix it unless somebody else will tell me, because they can look at it and go, oh, well, this. And I'm like, well, why didn't I think of that? Because, you know, it seems obvious when they say it, and I'll go, oh, okay, now I know how to fix it. And that, you know, that is actually a good feeling when somebody tells you, points out, because if, you know, you have a good relationship with your beta readers, they're telling you things that are wrong with your manuscript, but they're telling you in such a way that it kind of, you go, oh yes, now I know, now I can do it, you know?
Yeah.
And so you really I rely on my beta readers a lot, and probably too much, but I don't know. They might think so. I give them a lot of words to read, but I couldn't, because I couldn't figure out what, if I was just trying to do it myself, I would miss a lot, because it's, you know, I know what I was trying to get across. And even if I think, I don't know if I got that across, you know, I don't know how it's going to land until somebody else reads it. And then they say, well, no, you needed to add more emotion here. I didn't understand this, or didn't you think about this? And I go, oh, it's a plot hole, you know, and then I can fix it.
One thing I know with developmental editing and doing a lot of critique and beta reading is that sometimes I'll suggest something and it isn't always quite in line with the author's vision. So they might not completely accept the advice, but it does give them sort of a poke to reconsider or think about that area of the manuscript, and maybe, you know, hone in on okay, so there is something wrong here. But the suggestion isn't quite in line with what this vision is that I have, but I do need to fix it and figure out how to fix it so that it matches what I want to have happen. And so I think as a writer, when I have somebody giving me feedback, I really have to think about kind of how does what I have in my head, how do I make that clearer, and not necessarily, because you don't want to write by consensus or write by committee, but you do want to listen to what your editors and critiquers and beta feedback say, and kind of, you have to boil down the essence of what it is they are suggesting to figure out how it fits within your vision. And so just something, to think about as, as a writer, and you're hiring an editor, and just, because editors are human too, and we don't always see the big, we're looking for the big picture, but we don't always know what your vision is. So we're trying to kind of hone in on the essence of what we see you're going for, and kind of guide you into thinking about where those plot holes are and how to fill them, if that makes sense.
I think
so
I was just gonna add on to that, if I could. I have a beta partner who is she's excellent at finding all of my plot holes and pointing them out to me, but I rarely like her solutions. So there was a manuscript that I had where I had a character stowing away on a ship that was sailing off somewhere, and she thought, I can't believe that nobody would notice, that's stupid that she would just stow away. And so, and I honestly cannot remember what her solution was to this problem, but whatever it was, I thought it was equally stupid. But anyway, but it got me thinking, like, it really is really unrealistic that this character would actually be able to sneak on board the ship and hide somewhere, and so nobody would notice. And so I rejiggered the entire situation, the entire scenario that got that, because I needed that character on that ship. But I rejiggered the whole situation of how she got there, and it turned out, I ended up revising quite a large chunk of the storyline so that I could get her on there as an invited member of the group rather than somebody who was sneaking on board. So, but I think it made the story stronger in the long run to do that, because then she really did have a reason to be in that group, and a defined role that everybody was embracing and on board with, and then that made it more dramatic later on in the story when something went wrong with that role. So
I think a lot of the time when you get, like, when I make those same kind of suggestions, when I do like a manuscript critique and I read through this person's story and I'm like, this doesn't work, and if I offer a suggestion, normally that's my way of saying, this is what I was expecting from the scene. So it's like, this doesn't have to be the solution, but this is like the thread of where I thought it was going to go based on what I've read. So it's sort of like another way of looking at the problem, like, this is how I thought the scene was going to go, and then that can sometimes give the author a sort of jumping off point from, like, oh, okay, so that's where I need to aim, but this is the route I want to take to get there. And sort of a different way of looking at the problem, and what the reader is thinking as they're going through, because if it can jar you and take you out of the story, you're like, oh, how is she on this boat, how is she not being found? It sort of helps you look at the problem slightly differently, I think.
Exactly.
Just quick, I want to open up the chat for question and answer, so anybody watching can ask questions, and I will pass them on to the panelists here. But in the meantime, what are some common mistakes that either you make or that you see in the things that you edit and read, and how do you avoid them, as a writer?
Ooh, can I talk about my editorial pet peeves?
Absolutely.
Two things, people. One, the past tense of to lead is LED, not LEAD. LEAD is a mineral. It's a heavy metal that will poison you. LED is what you did when you led your friends on a journey to the park. So that is one of the things I see.
Led
I
them.
see lead as in to lead, spelled LEAD all the time, and it just really gets under my skin. And the other one is the whole lay, lie, laid, lane business. Please, please, please. I see that wrong in manuscripts all the time. Please look it up. Go to Grammar Girl. Go to the dictionary. Look it up. It's too complicated to explain, but just look it up and learn it.
We have a question here from Natasha. Do you have any advice for someone who would like to become an editor?
I would say I would say maybe have a go at some of the some training courses if you can find some. I'm a member of the Chartered Institute for Editing and Proofreading, and they have a lot of training courses on there. The Publishing Training Centre have a couple as well that are really good. There's lots of different courses you can take, and it's a really good way of just seeing whether you actually like it, because there's a part where you're just like, oh, I can spot a double space from a mile off, or I can point out missing apostrophes, but when you actually start doing it fully, do you really want to be doing this full time, and do you actually want to sort of engage all of your working day in it? And it will highlight whether you actually would really enjoy doing this, because you do have to enjoy it. You will get a lot out of it if you do. So I would say that definitely just explore a couple of courses and see whether it fits you, whether it works for you.
I think too, deciding what kind of editor you want to be. Do you want to focus on the structure and developmental side, or do you really love, you're already a grammar Nazi, so you really want to, focus in on that, because they're two different types of skills, right? And being able to point out the small things is one type of skill, but being able to look at the structure and find, understand how the characters develop and how a novel is paced and all of that is an entirely different set of skills. So really figure out what aspect of editing you like and really focus in on training yourself on that. So anybody else have anything to add in there?
I think training, if you can find somebody to mentor you, I think is also really important. When I started in the industry 30 years ago, I worked in-house and people were actually trained back then. And I don't know that there's as much training now on, sort of mentorship and on the job training as there used to be. It kind of, I have the sense, and you guys are younger and newer to, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I had just had the sense that sort of people are just like thrown into the pool and sink or swim. And unfortunately, this leaves the indie author world with a bunch of editors that you don't know if they're good or not. You don't know if they're, I think assessing quality is really hard unless you already have a sense of how to edit yourself, and it's difficult. And in my career, when I used to manage editors, I found very, very, very few people who were actually really good at it. It's a very difficult skill to master. And I think people tend to underestimate that. And they think that it's just a matter of like being a human spell checker. And that's not what it is. So I wish I don't have any advice actually, because I haven't actually done that side of it for a really, really long time. But I do think it's sort of regrettable that the industry seems to have moved away from mentorship and on the job training. And if I'm wrong about that, I hope I am, but
Maybe like
We have
volunteering for contests could help too. Like if they're needing like
Mhm.
free, like, I mean, kind of sucks work for free, but you could probably, like as a teacher, I have to edit my students' essays and stuff, but that's sometimes a different type of writing. But maybe like seeing what kind of magazines that are new that need like slush pile readers, that would work too. It's free, but it's also priceless training. Like Amanda said, it's training. You're training yourself. Whether or not you have a mentor to help you, you have to like learn it on your own. You know what I mean? Like on the job training.
Mhm. So we have another question from James Latimer. How do you choose authors and editors to work with?
Well, I know the way I did it was I was reading when I took a break with my writing. And so when I started writing again, I just tried to educate myself on the industry. And when I decided that to look into indie fantasy, I was reading a lot of indie fantasy novels. And often if you go into the acknowledgement section, a lot of people will thank their editors. And I would especially like if I found, a book I really liked and a book that looked like it was well edited and everything, then I would write down that editor if they said it. And then it became a point, it was like, well, I had a list and I kind of started in like the first editor who was now that I asked, she had her schedule didn't match mine because I was trying to enter SPIFBO. So I needed to have it published by, June and our schedules didn't match up. So I kind of went down the list and I was happy. So as long as I was looking at a book edited by that particular editor and saying, you know what, this is quality stuff. And then I contacted the editor and said, hey, what's your schedule? And I have this, and this is, I described the project a little bit. And then, we had a discussion and then we decided that we could, do it. And that's how I did things. So
I think
I'm
for me,
curious how the editors pick their authors.
I was about to say, for me, in terms of that, I'm not that selective in terms of whether I would pick and choose an author. I think the only time I've turned down a job when I've had a query come through is if I don't think that I could really help with that particular project if it's not in my particular area of expertise. For example, I get quite a few memoirs come through my way and people asking to do memoirs, and it's just not it takes a different kind of editing to do memoirs, and it's a different kind of storytelling, and there's a lot more sensitivity to it because it's someone's real life story, and that's just not where my skills lie. So I've turned down authors for that kind of work. In terms of other kind of selectiveness, there's not really anything I can think of where I would reject an author unless it was sort of a timing issue and I didn't think, the project was too much work to do and I didn't have the time in my schedule for that. But that's mostly it. It's just sort of whether I think I can help the author, because it's not going to work for both of us if I don't think I can give my best to them either. So that's the only instance for me, I would say.
I think for me, as an editor, pretty much is the same thing. I think I've only refused one manuscript, and that was just because it was not something that I connected to. I always ask for at least the first 10 chapters to look at so that I can see if it's something that I can personally connect to and get excited about. Because if it's a project that I can't really get excited about, it's really hard to look at the big picture and structure and stuff. And there's only been one that I just couldn't connect with the piece. It was in a genre that I don't really read often. And it's, so I try to, when I pick authors, look for, I will accept most genres, but if it's not a genre that I'm comfortable or familiar with, I will, turn it down, because I don't want to end up messing up the manuscript by my lack of knowledge about it. So, but as an author, when I selected my editor, I guess I kind of stalked them on Facebook and Twitter and you know, looked at their profile and their website and what they had done, and then reached out to them and said, hey, here's my project. Are you interested? And oh, and it looks like we're going to get booted off because it's time for the next one to start. So thank you for joining us for the editing panel, and thank you to all of our panelists. Go ahead and check out Artist Alley when you get a chance if you're watching, and have a good one. Enjoy the rest of QuaranCon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.